Okay. So I want to try to be quick about this because I only have 10 minutes. So this one's entitled Tale of Two Jews, the beginning, Tale of Two Jews. So basically what I want to say is between, during the time of the Hellenistic period when we have the Greeks invading Israel, the nation of Israel, and finally being replaced by the Romans, you have this, we have the Hanukkah story, the Maccabees taking over the temple, clearing it out in the 8 days in which the oil's burnt. But what you basically have is an interesting sideline that's going on during this whole time period. You have the temple folks, which are the tribe of Levi, and of course the children of Aaron, the sons of Aaron, which are the Kohen. So you have the Halevis and the Kohen. And what is going on is that if you look at the Torah, and of course I'll list all this stuff, you have all these tribes having all these different parts of Israel except for the tribe of Levi. And their purpose is that they're going to get monies and food and so forth from the other tribes, and they can focus on ministering and being servants to God, which is great. But they're not required. They are forbidden to own property because their whole focus is not supposed to be taking care of anything but God's needs in the temple, which is great at the beginning. But later on, you find out that when the invading forces, such as the Greeks and then the Romans, the group which becomes known as the Sadducees, placate to the invading force, and they are given property and money, and in return for that they are cooperating. So what crops up in counter to it is the Pharisaical group, what we now call Rabbinical Judaism, or what is Proto-Rabbinical Judaism, and that is in counter to it, and that's why there's such a development around 250 BCE and forward. Is you have these houses, these schools, which in Greek is called synagogue, where we get the word synagogue, school, of different rabbis or teachers is what it means in Hebrew. So you have the rabbinical or the Pharisaical groups developing, and even though people are going to the temple and giving sacrifices and showing up during the high holidays such as Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah and Passover and so forth, and giving what they need to give to become Nazirite vows and whatever other requirements, though the position of law and civil justice is given to the Sanhedrin, which is comprised primarily of Levites and priests and Kohens, the population is weary of them because of their collusion with the invading force. So what you have is you have the Sadducees. There are three groups. I know there's the Essenes, and we'll get to that really quickly. But you have primarily two groups. You have, and I'm only talking about inside the land of Israel. Outside the land of Israel, in the diaspora, people are living and they're going to synagogues because that's the only safe place they can get together and practice Judaism outside the land of Israel. But inside the land of Israel, you really have these forces, not unlike you have in Iraq with the Shiite. Well, that's a bad example, but anyway, but you basically have a group of people who are primarily are the ones that give down civil decisions such as lawsuits and court things, which would be the Sanhedrin, and the Temple Mount, which is you're paying the temple money and giving them food through the sacrificial system to support them. And they are friendly. They're cuddling up to the Romans and the Greeks, which are pagan. So what happens basically is that you have these Torah teachers in these schools, in these yeshivas, and they are basically, people are now going to them regardless of their background, whether they're Halevi or Kohen. Some of them are most of them are children of Benjamin and Judah. Yes. And what happens is you have this whole development. So what's causing this pressure when Jesus is arriving is this, you have these Sadducean people who basically, the Sadducean group, which are supposed to be the moral high ground, and they're supposed to give you fair treatment under the law, under the Torah, and they're not, because they're siding, of course, with the government that's standing there. And then you have the Pharisaical or the rabbinical groups who are having what we refer to as a Beit Din, which means that you have 3 scholars sitting in judgment, and making courts of law superseding the temple. So there's a pressure going on. And this is where the historical Jesus comes in. And basically, and of course we have the Essenes who go one step farther. They don't trust the temple, and they, instead of being opposed to them and open, they leave and they become ascetic, and they wait for the apocalypse. And I think a lot of that, if you look at the war scrolls in the Dead Sea Scrolls, you'll get a glimmer of what they were thinking. So this is what's going on. So you have the temple, which people are still attached to the temple, because even the rabbis are saying you have to go to the temple, you have to give the sacrifices as required, and you have to, whatever needs to be done that is required at the tent of meeting is required, and people are going those 3 times a year for Passover, Yom Kippur, and Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. But now the moral side is happening at the yeshivas, at the schools, and the rabbis, such as the famous Rabbi Hillel and Shammai and Gamaliel, you have all these guys, and they are also adding on to the oral traditions. Now, the oral traditions are not being written down just yet. The assumption is that it's being written shortly thereafter, or around the same time as the destruction of the temple in 70 CE. Because the argument between the pressure between the Sadducean temple control and the Pharisaical rabbinical control kind of settles itself, because no temple, what do you got left? And there comes. So Yeshua is entering. He's coming in, and though he yells at the Pharisees in most of the documents that you read in John and Luke, he is probably either in a seeing, because the assumption is, well, we'll go into that, but the assumption is that either he has a development of the Essene group, but definitely probably he is part of the school of Hillel and a Pharisee. They call him rabbi all the time. There's a reason for that. They weren't calling priests rabbis. They called them Halevis and Kohen. That is what the term is. Chief priests, like Caiaphas, for example. So this is what's going on. So now there's a war for the hearts and minds, basically, because the Sadducean people, the Sadducean group, the high priests, are basically are collecting monies and enriching themselves, because unlike when it was under King David and Solomon, where they got enough to take care of themselves, the new Roman and prior Greek groups were allowing them to enrich themselves and buy land, which was totally counter to Torah. So this is what's going on. So now you have this moral issue of basically the Pharisaical group trying to wrest control from the Sadducean group, and ultimately you have groups like the Zealots who want to take out the Romans to bring back the line of David. The Messiah, the Mashiach, is supposed to come. So this is what's happening as Jesus is arriving. And is still happening after Jesus is hung on a cross, dies, and for those of you who believe, is resurrected and goes to heaven. When he gets ascended into heaven, if you look at the documents such as Josephus, Philo, even you're looking at the Dead Sea Scrolls and stuff is still being written 30, 40, 50 years after, 30, 40 years after Jesus' ascension, basically. And what you also notice is around the same time, James and the Council of Jerusalem, which I like to refer to it as not the church, it's the Council of Jerusalem, are operating and acting like a school, like a synagogue, and are still going to the temple and still giving alms to the Sadducees. So it's still going on until approximately 70 AD. All right, next one.